G'day guys, we're back talking about Survivor. So I want to touch on a subject that I've believed for a very long time. As much as I do love this character on TV, and I think she is one of the most entertaining players that we've seen in Survivor. She's pulled off some great move, well, one great move that I've seen that was really amazing TV and one of my favourite moves in Survivor history. Parvati, but there does seem to be a misconception out there that she's an amazing Survivor player. And I'd say she's a good Survivor player. She's not that great though, and I wanted to go through and just show you how lucky that she's gotten, and let you guys make your mind up and see whether you think Parvati is this amazing player that people sort of talk about. So let's get into it. So Survivor Cook Islands, she does a great job pre-merge. She is never in trouble. She's never a target at all, and that's due to her social game. Does really, really well. Once she hits the merge, her and the rest of the Rero tribe seem to be completely oblivious to the fact that Yule has an idol, or could have an idol, even though Jonathan tells them that, hey, Yule probably has the idol because I don't have it, and they still don't believe him, even though Yule went to Exile Island and had a chance to find the idol on episode 2. So it's that was a really bizarre move, and that obviously led to Jonathan just having to go with the I2s. Very strange move there. After Jonathan goes, I think she doesn't bury her game completely like Candace does, so give her credit there. But yeah, ultimately Cook Islands, great social game, does really well in the social game that season, and one big mistake at the merge, along with the rest of her Rero tribe mates, in not hearing out Jonathan and not giving him a chance to actually join them, because Jonathan would have just been blackmailed if he didn't, go back to the I2 crowd. Just because that's the nature of the super idol. And thank God they got rid of that by the time Micronesia hit. So Micronesia was next. First episode, she gets targeted through no fault of her own by Jonathan. That's purely due to her previous season being looked at as a threat. I'd never fault her for that. But at the end of the day, it did seem like up until towards midway through episode 3, Sari was going to go with the Jonathan, Yowman, Eliza, Amy alliance. And it seemed like Johnny Fairplay was going to go. Interviews afterwards have said that Johnny Fairplay, if he had stuck in the game and been allowed to actually have painkillers to help his back and his jaw, he would have been going with the Eliza, Amy, Jonathan, Yowman alliance as well. So the scenario at the start of Micronesia that wasn't shown so much is that Sari had a final 2 deal with Yowman. And that was all good up until, I believe it was episode 3, the reward challenge. And they volunteered to send someone to Exile Island, and Yowman suddenly put his hand up and said, let's send Jonathan. And Sari was not happy about that at all, because Sari was like, hey, what the hell, man, we have a final 2 alliance. And that is what led Sari to then go with Amanda and Parvati, and then they had that conversation on the raft, and Sari ends up deciding with them. So with Yowman not playing optimally, making a big mistake, that's how Parvati's alliance then got the numbers in that tribe. And she, again, through no fault of her own, would have been the first one out if something crazy didn't happen to Johnny Fairplay at the very start, just before the Survivor Season 16 began. So then we move into the post-swap. Here is basically a battle between Parvati and Eliza. I don't think James was really playing much of a social game out there at all. And Jonathan obviously has to leave through medical reasons. So it becomes kind of a battle between Parvati and Eliza. Who can get Alexis and Natalie and Jason on their side? And Parvati kind of wins. She gets Alexis and Natalie on her side, and Eliza gets Jason on her side. So give Parvati the 2-1 win over on there. Good job with Parv there. Then she gets to the merge, and here she really doesn't do much at all. And I think this is probably the biggest misconception with Parvati's game, is that she does practically nothing after the merge. It's all Sari and Natalie, and Amanda also has her own sort of like big move she pulls off at the final 6. Parvati helps her with that, but she helps her by just not saying anything and not giving up Amanda's secret. That's all that is. With the Aussie vote, it really is Sari who kind of like gets the ball rolling on that, and Parvati's kind of like the last person to jump on board. It's a bit like what happened with the Kirby vote. It's actually very similar, now that I think about it. They basically have like the numbers to at least get 4, and then they just need Parvati for that extra 5th. And then we go into obviously the final 8. Doesn't really have anything to do with that necessarily, apart from just pulling through in that challenge and keeping her arm up, which is so super impressive. Then we go into the later game, and again, Parvati doesn't really have anything to do with the, she just doesn't give up Amanda's secret, so Amanda's able to play her idol and blindside Alexis. Then you get into the final 5 with Eric, and Parvati is the one person in that Black Widow alliance who doesn't actually really do anything. Amanda kind of like gives Eric the 3rd degree at Tribal Council. Parvati does a little bit, but it's mostly Amanda. Throughout the entire day beforehand, it's all Natalie grilling Eric, Natalie doing the move. And Cerie's obviously the one who comes up with it. Being the gangster in an Oprah suit, the mob boss like she is. So we then go into the final 3. This is where, or I don't know when Parvati goes to Exile Island. I'm pretty sure it's in the final 5. And she actually said she found the idol but didn't bother getting it. I'd actually believe that. I think Parvati in this position knew that she didn't need to have the idol. She was in a position where a lot of people wanted to take it to the end. At the final 3, she also said she threw that final challenge in a Richard Hatch-like move where you basically throw the challenge so you're not having to be the one who chooses, because you know that both finalists are going to choose you, and you'd rather not piss off one of the finalists. And this really, I believe her 100% when she says this, and then she does actually get the win, possibly because of this, because Cerie does actually end up voting for Parvati over her, and that kind of gives her the 5-3 win at the end. I think Amanda's final Tribal Council is much better in Micronesia than it was in China. I don't have too many big faults with Amanda's final Tribal Council speech in Micronesia. It's real China, she's horrific. Here she's much better, to her credit, and but Parvati doesn't really do that great either. I think they're both pretty average, and I think obviously if you know, with the amount of medivacs that Micronesia had, they decided to basically not push the season forward. Instead, they just had a final 2 instead of a final 3, but didn't tell the contestants if it was a final 3. Obviously, with interviews, a lot of people have sort of gone through the votes of what that final 3 of Cerie, Amanda, and Parvati would have been, and you can kind of work it out. It would have been awesome. It would have been a 3-2-2. Parv and Amanda would have got 2 votes each, and Cerie would have got 3. So that would have been the final results by the sounds of it. After all the sort of interviews have sort of been done. So yeah, basically to give you an idea, Eliza, Alexis, and Eric have all said they would have voted for Cerie. Amanda and Ozzy and James, probably to no one's surprise, would have voted for Amanda. And then Parvati's votes would have been Jason and Natalie. So we now move on to Heroes as Villains. Heroes as Villains, again, she's unfairly targeted just purely because of past performance, because she's seen as a big social threat, especially. Initially, what isn't shown on screen, and this is from Sandra's post-game interviews, which she gave a really in-depth post-game interview about Heroes as Villains, where she talked about how the initial alliance on the beach was actually, it was her, Rob, and Courtney were a trio, and Russell, Danielle, and Parvati, as we saw, were a trio, and they were actually all together. And that was kind of like the original majority. And Tyson was kind of there, and as the show went on, as the days went on, and with the villains winning most of the early immunity challenges too, they had plenty of time. Tyson kind of would formed a rift between Rob and Russell. He was the one who kind of did it, and he then sort of put himself into the majority alliance with Rob, Courtney, Sandra, and brought in Coach and Jerry. And that's how, when you get to the final 6, I think it's the second time they go to Tribal Council, you do have this 6-person majority alliance. And by that time, Russell's also gone off and looked at the idol in front of everyone, and Russell kind of cemented himself with, and yeah, Parvati is kind of guilty by association, and guilty because she, is seen as a big threat from Micronesia and Cook Island, and to a lesser extent Cook Islands. But I think your reputation kind of precedes her here, even if that reputation of just being the flirt has always been unfair. I think she's more than that, even though I'm talking about how she's way overrated in this video. I think she's far more than a flirt as well. I think it's a very one-dimensional way of looking at her as a player and as an entertaining TV personality, because she really is. Then we get into the vote where Russell basically comes up with a plan to give the idol to Parvati and then convince Tyson to flip his vote to Parvati, which is one of the greatest moves in Survivor history, without a doubt. I don't know if it gets as much love as it should, because I think this is amazing, and I love the fact that Russell was actually more than happy just to go out. And I think Russell thought heading into that tribal council, there's a very good chance I'm getting myself voted off here, but I don't want to just go along with the move and just try and suck up to this alliance to try and hang in there. And yeah, I love that he did it. I love that he tried to take over power of the game right then and there, rather than just trying to survive till the merge. I think it's an amazing move. And I think, yeah, again, Parvati does get very lucky with this move. Because I think in a normal scenario, Russell would have, just played the idol for himself and Parvati goes home here. But we end up getting that. Jerry then jumps back over to that alliance and they kind of get the majority. I do give Parvati some credit there as well, because I think there was some animosity from Jerry early on with Parvati in that season that we saw in episode 3 that I don't think ever really got kind of explained at all. I don't know whether it was, I don't know why Jerry disliked Parvati, but it may have been more to do with her previous reputation, because it seemed like as the season went on, they became friends. And I think we saw that through the show. There was no issue with Parvati and Jerry after episode 3. So I think as Jerry got to know Parvati, they seemed to get along a lot better. Then she sits down at the Outback Steakhouse and just happens to sit down at the bench where you get the napkins, and she rolled out a napkin and found an idol clue. Sure enough, they found that idol immediately when they got back to camp. So I don't know whether that was her and Danielle just being really smart and knowing how to interpret the clue, or the clue was really obvious. I just can't remember exactly, but still very lucky that she sat down at that one napkin where the idol clue was there. Then we get to, she's got that idol. We also have the amazing moment where JT gives the idol to Russell, and Russell just decides to give the idol to Parvati. Because Russell is the one who is the Trojan horse. He's the one who may flip to the hero, so he feels safe. He shouldn't feel safe though, because the heroes should have actually just voted for Russell in that merged tribal council. We'll get into that in another video. That would have been the move. But ultimately we have Parvati sort of using both those idols to save other people, which is absolutely amazing, because you had Russell, who was probably not the person she was going to give the idol to, because Russell was playing up the fact that he might be flipping to the heroes. Danielle had won immunity, so she got 2 idols, and it's up to her to play either Sandra, Jerry, or herself. After a conversation with Amanda, she calls a bluff and plays the idol for Sandra and Jerry. Absolutely amazing. Such a phenomenal move. Really, really good. And again, one of 2 absolutely insane moves from that kind of alliance of Russell and Parvati that season. Really great. I think we saw the downfall of her social game though in that episode, where she is kind of getting shunned. I don't know to what degree by the heroes, but she kind of has a bit of a tantrum and gets kind of sick of it. And I don't know whether that attitude kept up through the entire post-merge. It wouldn't shock me if it did, because there does seem to be a theme where Parvati will sort of talk just with her crew and not really anyone else. But that's something that sort of pops up through the show as you follow it as well. Then as we get to the final tribal council, again, not too much happens for the rest of that show. She obviously has Russell under her thumb, which, well done for that, but that may just be because Russell, I think, kind of had the hots for her. Let's be real. But yeah, Russell for some reason targets Danielle over her at the final 7, which is, I think there is the argument to be said that Russell felt like he could beat Parvati at the end more because Parvati had already won, but I think Parvati's probably a bit more likable than Danielle as well, so I don't know. Not too much happens with Parvati after that though. Like, there's not really much that Parvati does through the rest of that game. She kind of comes through as like a strong challenge competitor, but again, I'd say a lot of the challenges that Parvati wins are the same. It's basically how much lactate endurance do you have in your delts. That's really a lot of it, because one of them's holding your hand up like that, one's holding your hand up like that, one's holding your arm out like that. It's all kind of very similar challenges, except for the big totem pole challenge at the final 10 in the merge episode. That was different, and another endurance challenge that Parvati was phenomenal at. But it also meant that at the final 3, She did get a lot of credit. I didn't like in the preview for this season they showed Coach and Rupert being the bitter jurors who didn't vote for her and hold it against her, when Coach clearly voted for her very easily. Coach basically used his final tribal council speech to insult Sandra for not doing anything, and insult Russell for being a liar, and then just congratulate Parvati for being such a great challenge competitor. Like, Coach was 100% behind Parvati. And to Parvati's credit, Courtney would have been a Parvati vote if Sandra wasn't there. In any other iteration of that finals, I think Courtney votes for Parvati, because Courtney and Parvati got along really well in the Villains tribe, even though they were on different alliances. And Courtney did have some things to say about Parvati on that tribe. We had then the dynamic with the heroes. That it was a really interesting dynamic in that tribal council, because they weren't so much bitter, and Rupert especially, like I talked to him, wasn't bitter. Rupert was bitter against Russell for just lying as much as possible to get to the end, which is the easiest way to get to the end in Survivor. Just make deals with everyone, and it's kind of a cop out though. It's a very easy way to play. But he basically talked about how, he obviously already has a close relationship with Sandra from Pearl Islands. He then and does have a level of respect for Sandra even coming into the game. And then basically says what the heroes are thinking at the final tribal council, which is like, Sandra, I'm so sorry. We are all so sorry we didn't listen to you. Like, we could have listened to you and actually got to the end, but because we're stupid, we're up here. We're sorry. Which is such a weird dynamic for the final tribal council, because it was really interesting. That's why I love the Heroes of Villains final tribal council, because it's such a strange dynamic. I don't think I ever remember seeing that, like a whole group of people basically having that mindset. Sure enough, they all voted for Sandra, and Rupert, but Rupert also was really cool in this final. Again, I'll bang on about how much I love Rupert. Like, post-merge Rupert Heroes of Villains is really great. I know people are sick of Rupert and all that sort of thing, but it's I loved Rupert in the post-merge of Heroes of Villains. He's really interesting for many different reasons. He plays really well as well. He is the voice of reason for the hero tribe, and the rock in the pocket thing is such a smart idea that totally worked. It was great. Yeah, love that. Go Rupert. And Rupert basically talks about how Parvati was such a warrior in those challenges and gives her a lot of credit for that. And I think Rupert does vote for Sandra, but I think Rupert is genuinely quite torn and doesn't know who to vote for there. But I really appreciated that. That's why I thought Coach and Rupert, they're scowling in that little montage they show of Parvati at the beginning of this season. And it's like they're scowling at Russell. Like, they both were big fans of Parvati. Like, Coach voted for Parvati 100%. He would have voted for Parvati 10 times over the other two if he could have. And Rupert almost voted for Parvati. He was very close, but he ended up voting for his old friend Sandra. The two hero women I thought was unfair though. I've always heard there was that Amanda and Parvati kind of drifted apart after Micronesia. And I think literally that was just all on Amanda being upset that Parvati beat her. I'll be honest, I think that's what it is. I don't know. They did seem like friends when they got onto the merge beach in that season, though. But I do find it odd that Amanda kind of just, ghosted Parvati after Micronesia. I always thought that was kind of strange, because they did seem like really good friends out there. And yeah, and she also voted for Sandra, which was, but then Candace and Parvati, who are also friends from Cook Islands, Candace saying how, Parvati was like an abused spouse under Russell's thumb is completely off. I don't know where she was getting that from. And I don't know, Candace kind of showed her own, perhaps, lack of intelligence when she came back for a third time, to be honest. How she doesn't really see things from both sides. Which, Bloodburst Water Candace, who's swearing at Brad Culcoper on Bloodburst Water while she's on Redemption Island, probably... I don't know if I think she kind of jumps onto one side of the fence and then just stays there and doesn't see both sides. I don't get where she was bringing that from. I think Parvati and Russell always had an alliance, but were always kind of battling each other. And I don't think anyone was under anyone's thumb. I think if anyone was under someone's thumb, I think Russell was under Parvati's thumb, if anything. You don't get given two idols and be under the thumb of someone. I don't know. Anyway, So I don't think that was... And again, Jerry ended up voting for Parvati, which kind of shows that I think, any riff that Jerry might have had against Parvati was I think Parvati did win her over as the season went on, so credit for Parvati there. Yeah, but I don't think it's a bit of jury. I think there's a really interesting dynamic. I think maybe Amanda and Candace were, but a really interesting dynamic where I think Candace was just way off base, and I think Amanda could be better from Micronesia, but I don't know. But it did seem like there were a handful of people there, like Courtney and Rupert, who really liked Parvati's game, but they just happened Sandra was there instead. They would have voted pretty much for Parvati over anyone else except for Sandra. Yeah, so I think Parvati did play a great game there, but I think it is very overrated because I think she is very much just saved by Russell in an amazing move in the post merge. Although, again, to her credit, she was targeted not on her own fault, so that's another thing. But yeah, I think the merge vote, that's a fantastic move. That double idol play, one of the best moves I've seen in Survivor. Really, really cool. And the fact that you've left yourself, I don't discredit her for like not keeping an idol and only using one. I think that's still that was absolutely the right play. But anyway, now we jump on to 10 years later, Winners at War. Now, Winners at War, we kind of have the same sort of thing set up where Parvati before Heroes of the Villains had talked about how her issue was like not working with everyone. She kind of only worked with her people and she wants to have a working relationship with everyone. I don't think she did it on Heroes as Villains, unfortunately. And a lot of that was probably due to the fact that people were targeting her purely based on her reputation coming into the game. And that's both tribes, the Villains pre-merge and the Heroes post-merge. But in Winners at War, I think that fault again turns up because we have Parvati joining up with Rob and Ethan, playing perfectly the first episode, somehow not getting targeted at all. And what I've heard from a very long, in-depth interview with Adam after the game is that Adam and Denise were the targets in that first tribal council, but really, Adam had a secret alliance with Boston Rob, and Denise had a secret alliance with Parvati. So they kind of were on the old school team, just secretly. So that's kind of where they got the numbers from, and that's where Jeremy, Michelle, and Natalie all went on the outs on that first tribal council on the Salé Beach, and Ben, I think, was kind of with them, but just jumped on board to be in the majority at the end of the day. Then we get into, and I wouldn't be shocked if that was maybe a conversation with, who knows, Adam or Denise or one of the old, don't know, but Jeremy seemed to initially be most shocked that Ben flipped, and I think that's what happened there. Anyway, we're talking about Parvati, not Ben, sorry. Now we jump into the next time Salé go to Tribal Council. And I think it's very telling that Danny, so what apparently happened in that vote was that the new schoolers did actually kind of team up and want to target like the safest bet in the old schoolers, which was Danny, who was the person less in that alliance. And yeah, I think what happened here was that it seemed like Danny was targeting Parvati out of the blue. I don't think that's actually the case. I think Danny knew she was very much on the chopping block and decided just to throw one of the other old schoolers under the bus, and she chose Parvati. So this is one where I don't think Parvati is necessarily to blame for being the person that Danny targeted, saying that like Parvati's not making me feel like I'm in the alliance, Parvati's this, Parvati's that. I don't know if that's really the case after listening to interviews after the show. It seemed like Danny was just desperate and needed someone else to target, and Parvati was the one she picked. It is surprising though that she went to Rob and tried to get her to take out Parvati, tried to get him to take out Parvati. So it gives me an impression that Danny had a closer relationship with Rob than she did Parvati. But yeah, and then as we go on, the next episode, Parvati doesn't really do too much. It kind of ends up being a battle between Rob, Adam, and who can get, Rob, Adam, and then who can get sort of like Jeremy and Michelle on their side. Parvati doesn't do too much here either. So Parvati has a very quiet sort of like Winners at War because she's teamed up with Boston Rob, and Boston Rob can kind of just do everything for you that's just naturally how he kind of plays, which is fair enough. I think Parvati does what she should do in that season, and then she gets completely tribe swapped. Completely swap screwed. I don't think anyone's been more swap screwed than Parvati. And I mean, maybe you can go back to like Aaron and James in China, if you remember that scenario, and Sharia and Frosty. Like that tribe swap was horrific in China. Good season, terrible twist. But in this one, you've got a pre-game alliance that had existed for a long time with Nick, Michelle, and Wendell. who all knew each other before the game, and Nick and Wendell have now solidified that in the game. Then you've got Yule, who also made a pre-game alliance with them before the game through the power of Twitter. But basically, Yule jumped in on that alliance late, but he was kind of already in an alliance with them, and he already had an alliance now solidified with Wendell and Nick from the original Dakal. I mean, what hope does Parvati have? That was ridiculous. I'm like, there's nothing Parvati could have done there. That was really tough. This season now, we get to Australia versus the world, and this is where this is where I've really started to look at Parvati. It's like, okay, Parvati's definitely very overrated now. I've looked at her as someone who has never had an amazing social game with everyone in the game. Definitely does with like her very close allies, but that's about it. And has made one amazing move in Survivor, being the merge episode of Heroes as Villains, and that's it. And she really hasn't done too much else. She's very good at certain challenges as well. That certainly came to the fore in both Micronesia and Heroes as Villains. Anything with shoulder endurance or hanging off the totem pole, she's very good. So we ended up then getting into this season where Rob comes out, and you've got a 4-person majority in the world tribe with international players and 3 Americans. Then we have Rob basically, in his mind, he's like, okay, we could take out the biggest threat of them, which is probably Tony. And Tony's the biggest threat as far as like, finding idols and coming up with something crazy. Or we could take out the weakest player in Sari. But what happens with Rob and Parvati is they try and talk to each other. Parvati then makes herself the target from Rob. Now, what happens is Parvati obviously wins this battle and sends Rob home anyway. But, as my alarm goes off to tell me to stop talking. But essentially, Parvati does become the target of Rob here, and I think what happens is, honestly, the person who really gets the other international players, that trio of Cass, Lisa, and Tommy on board, is Sari. And especially with Sari's relationship with Lisa. So Sari, I think more than anyone, pulls that trio over. And because I think Tony here is not playing the game at all, which is actually very smart on his part. He's just going to go winners at war. He's in lockdown. He's just tell me who to vote, and that's it. So Sari brings over this trio, and then that is what saves Parvati in the end. Now we then move into, as Parvati goes through the rest of the pre-merge in this season so far, which, if you're watching this video in the future, we're now at the final 8 in this season. So we've just had the start of the post-merge. Parvati brings the women over. She decides when they go to Tribal Council again that what they're going to do is she wants to save Tony, but Tony obviously then comes after her. But she never tells Tony this. Tony then comes after her at Tribal Council because he feels like she's the best bet. And in the end, Parvati is happy to let Tony go at this point, obviously. So that one is not a huge fault on her. I don't mind her not actually approaching Tony and saying, "Hey, I'm trying to save you. Let's work together." But ultimately, I think she would have been much better off just staying American trio strong and not having these world players sort of like come after her, because I think that is what's going to happen very soon. And it's already kind of been what's happened with Cass in the post-merge of this game. Then we get to the merge and the auction, and Parvati has... and again, she kind of got very lucky to get her first idol. She just happened to find the key that was on the branch. That's purely luck. It's kind of like sitting down at an Outback Steakhouse reward and getting the right napkin with the idol clue. Then we get to the auction, and she kind of has a go at Luke for sending her back to camp. Most players would not do that. Most players would be like the generic, "Oh no, it's all good, I get it, no worries." Instead, she basically very openly is hostile to Luke in this situation, which I think speaks a lot to either how big a target she already thinks she is, and she's like, okay, I definitely know that I can't work with Luke, or it's just how big her ego is that she can play like this and get away with it, which she might, but it still is making a bigger target for herself, and I think it's probably still better just to be nice and not grill Luke over this decision. And also know that, like, hey, you've seen Survivor before, you've played Survivor a lot, like, you should know there's probably an advantage back at camp. Like, that's just kind of how Survivor is. So we then go into getting to the cookie jar, which is a very fun little twist. If you see the first shot of that cookie jar, the scroll is right there on top of it. And apparently Parvati doesn't see this scroll until a long time afterwards, to the point where she actually, like, slams the jar into the hole that she dug, and then she finds the scroll. Then I'm just like, God, she nearly missed it. I was like, that was very obvious. So that's like a random kind of critique of Parvati's game. She nearly missed this scroll here. And then we end up seeing how in the future episodes, you've got Parvati. Then I don't know whether I should get into the spoilers here. So it's 30 minutes now, so I might just leave it at that. But we do see spoilers for the most recent episodes of Australia vs. the World if you haven't seen them. So Parvati ends up making this new alliance with Shonny and Kirby and Sari, and they make a plurality vote to just get the 4 votes and take out Sarah from the Australian tribe. Fantastic move, because you're making this new alliance here, and you're also taking out someone from the Australian tribe, which really was kind of like the big picture, which was 5 world players, 5 Australian players. Who's going to go home with that first tribal council? They went about it a very different way than what you'd expect. It made fantastic TV, and I do wonder but then the next episode you kind of have an alliance being built against Kirby, and now she is in a position where she kind of has to vote for Kirby or against Kirby, and it looks like she ends up just voting against Kirby because it's either her or go against Sari, who she's known for decades, like she said. So yeah, interesting. I think Parvati is anyway. That's all my rundown of Parvati's epic game and history through US Survivor and now through Australian Survivor, which is so much fun to say. But yeah, I think ultimately it does come down to Russell did help her a lot in that Heroes as Villains game. Luck has helped her a lot as well. Just with fair play, and Sari would have gone against Parvati up until that reward challenge in episode 3 in Micronesia. Then you had the first season where she, assumed that Yul didn't have an idol and didn't give Jonathan the time of day when Jonathan's trying to save them. You've got the amazing move in the final 10 of Heroes as Villains. And then there's not much else that Parvati has done great in the game. It's a lot of luck, a lot of finding idol clues and keys for idols, and just randomly getting given idols randomly. And we'll see how the rest of this game goes, and I can't wait to go through it. But at the moment, Parvati is not in my top 10 all-time Survivor players, and I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how the rest of the game goes. She could definitely get in there, but I think a lot of people might have her as like top 3, and I don't know about that. It's Anyway, make your own mind up, and that's my opinion on Parvati. It was very fun to run through this part of Survivor history, and love Parvati on my TV screens. Had a lot of fun with her, and I tell you what, as much as I say that Parvati's been the luckiest player in Survivor history, she got more swap screwed than almost anyone in history in Winners at War, so I'll always mention that as well as a caveat. Like, not always. She got very unlucky that season. So anyway, have a great day, guys, and we're not too far off the episode 7. Wow, it's only episode 7. It feels like we've been through so much Survivor already in this awesome season. Hope you guys enjoy it, and see you guys in the next video. Peace out. Bye.